said I had to use a mic for the audio, so we'll go ahead and get started. I think a lot of people roaming around still looking for rooms, and it's interesting with the group we've got because a lot of the folks here are vendors that we're going to be talking about, and then a lot of you guys are involved in the business, so it's a good mix, interactive, everyone throw in, jump in, very informal, so we can go. And my name is Scott France, and I've been in this world for about 32 years as far as the servicing side. I started with one of the, I guess you can call manufacturers. I was with World Omni whenever no one would finance Toyotas. And I went to what I call the dark side, the origination side of the world for a little while, and found that I liked the servicing side better because the customers didn't lie as much as our dealers lied to us in putting together deals. So I look at this from both sides of the world, and right now I'm with a company called Innovate Auto Finance, loan portfolio servicing, Caprock remarketing. I sold the two loan servicing company and a remarketing company to Innovate about 2 years ago. We're growing so fast, and it made sense for us to do so. Right now, we buy small portfolios, but our main business is loan servicing. So when a lot of what we're talking through in here, it comes from a servicing perspective, and you guys got questions, ask. What I want to do today is talk about consumer over time. We're going to go through, and I found this interesting looking at the generations, going back over 100 years of what the consumer looked like to today. And when we're looking at how we are going to do business tomorrow, whether it's at a dealership or whether it's in an auto finance company or as a servicer or a vendor, this stuff makes your mind spin. Dealing with today and tomorrow's customers, again, we have to figure out how to do things better. Servicing the stuff in the middle, I talk about that because the beginning of the business, the sales, the marketing, the origination piece is sexy. Selling a car is sexy. And then the loan pays out and everything's good. But it's all that stuff that happens in the middle which could really impact whether you make money or you don't. So we're going to talk about all that stuff in the middle. The customer experience, something we always have to be concerned about. Insourcing versus outsourcing. I'll be the first one to tell you I was always an opponent of outsourcing. Some of you in here will agree, I never liked outsourcing. But as time goes by and future, when we start looking at business, we start recognizing, does it actually make sense? And then adapt or perish. And when you start looking at some of the businesses today and what it's going to look like in the future, there's going to be a lot, we're already seeing a lot of dropout because people aren't adapting. We talk about the generations, and I'm not going to read these word for word. You guys can read them. I think everyone's able to read here. If you look at these generations, you can see several things. You can tell the mindset of what the consumer was. You can tell the morality of the consumer and the commitment of the consumer, both in their processes and both in the way they do business. So the thing that we started with is in 1901, 1926, and these are the people that are born there naturally. They became consumers after that. But this was the greatest generation. These were the folks that went through the Great Depression. They were very focused on one thing. Teamwork was key. They believed in community. Marriages were for life, we've got in here. Everything was about commitment with this group of people. The thing they didn't do is they didn't finance anything. They saved up. They bought everything with cash. Then we moved into the next generation, the traditionalist consumer. And these are the ones that went on 27 to 45. These are the folks that, whenever they got in their late teens, 20s, that ended up in the Korean conflict and then in the Vietnam War. These are the peoples that grew into the 50s, and you started getting into the civil rights movement, the free love movement. Everything's cool, world peace and everything. And this generation started to change. You can see marriage was still for life. Divorcing, having children at this point were still out. There was discipline, self-sacrifice, cautious. They were still about what can we do to get things done. From a consumer standpoint, these were still on the cash side of the world. Then we moved to the dreaded baby boomers. And the baby boomers started building on the groups, the consumers that came from the 50s, the me generation. They started focusing more on it's all about me. We've got in here self-righteous. They were self-centered. They're the first generation that really started doing things, buying things on credit. Credit still meant something to this generation in the early times. I remember when we were talking to customers, we'd say, if this account goes over 30, it's going to stay on your credit, blah, blah, blah. Now you say that, and they go, yeah, and? So that's when this generation's the first one to experience that. This is the first TV generation. From a marketing standpoint, if you think about it, a lot of advertising started hitting on TVs, and advertisers started growing. This is that first group, and because of that, this group of consumers was the one that started having to have things now. They didn't want to wait. That's why the credit piece came in. Instead of saving up like the other generations, this group had to have it now, thus the beginning of the finance world. This group is very entrepreneurial, very individualistic. And then we go to this disposable income piece. This generation's the first generation we all know through the 80s. There was a lot of money being made, even into the early 90s. That's where this generation here was probably one of the more affluent generations as compared to the groups of the past. Then we get into this Gen Y, the millennials. And this is an interesting one. We've got up here that they respect authority. This is really one of the first generations that grew up with the beginnings of technology. This is the generation where mom, the soccer mom, every second of the day, the kids' lives were planned. They were constantly moved from one thing to another. And because of that, now they schedule everything. These are the planners, the schedules. These ones felt a lot of pressure getting into college and that type thing. This group would be the ones that preferred to work in teams. The second to the last bullet is the one I think that is something that we all look at and say, yeah, we see that. There's no winners and losers in this generation. Everyone's a winner. Everyone's a winner. Everyone gets the trophy and that type thing. So this group, from an employment standpoint, is a very challenging group to manage if you're from one of the other generations. Then we go to Gen Z. Gen Z is the ones that are getting ready to come into the market. Now, the interesting thing with Gen Y, the one we just looked at, if you think about 9/11, that was the 90s, I believe, okay? Kids that were born in that generation, in that Gen Y generation, have known really nothing but wars. We had 9/11. We had the Kuwait invasion. We've got the Operation Desert Storm, Desert Freedom. You've got ISIS. You got the Taliban, all that. That's all these kids when they were coming up as teenagers, and that's all they've known. The other thing that they knew is 2007. They knew 2001, the mini depression, and that 2007 depression. So that consumer base started shifting, and when they're getting into it now, that's the first consumer base that's really starting to adapt back to, when it's spilling over into this Gen Z, into I need to own stuff, okay? Now, when we look at subscription, car subscription services, ride share and all that, that's more that Gen Y generation's more subscribing to that. But they're saying this Gen Z consumer, because of the plight that they've seen in their parents, their houses got foreclosed on in 07 to 09, they were getting cars repossessed, all the turmoil in the world. They're saying this generation here is going to go back to an ownership type environment. You can see there's two groups of Gen Z. Again, these are the ones coming out, the ones that are 8 to 12 years old now, and then the ones that are 8 to 7 or older. This is the other thing you got to remember. This is the first generation, and it said computers that grew up with computers, but this generation's not growing up with computers. They're growing up with iPads, with tablets, and phones. They very rarely play with computers. It's all the instant communication channels. So that's this group here. It says they're going to be very savvy consumers. They know what they want. Because they've got at their hand this thing, they can look up anything. They can tell what the price is. They can look at ratings, the whole 9 yards. So this consumer here is going to be a challenge for us, whether it's from a servicing side of the world, if we're a dealership trying to sell a car, and even and this group is the one from a vendor standpoint on outsourcing that really got me thinking about the specialization of a lot of the vendors that are out there, which a lot of you guys are. So what does it all mean? Tomorrow's consumers look a lot different than they did yesterday. And we've seen such a shift. I mean, you think the internet came in the 90s and look what it's done. And what's it going to look like tomorrow? We're seeing the disruptors now, or they call them disruptors, all these rideshare services and subscription services. What's the car environment going to look like tomorrow? I don't think we know. We got a lot of people that are playing with it, trying to figure it out. Then the stuff in the middle. That's what we're going to talk about, the stuff in the middle. How are we going to cope with all of this type of stuff? Got in here, we love all things new. You start dating, it's cool, new girlfriend, new boyfriend, and you put on your best, and you're going out and do the finest things, your best manners. Then you start getting familiar. Then you start burping and making noises. And then you get bored. And then you move on to the next one, where we got the new car smell. You get a new car, you get home, next week you wash it, vacuum it out. Next week, wash it, vacuum out. 3 weeks later, you wash it. A year later, you may vacuum it. It's that new car. Opening season. We always love opening season of baseball. There's always big events around the opening season, the opening home games. Then they go to that long, long stretch. And then the playoffs come and everyone gets interested again. Same with basketball. You're looking around Halloween and everything starts. And then that long season, and you look at like Cleveland with LeBron and those guys, the mid-season, they're just hardly even playing. They just do enough to get by and win enough games because their season begins in the playoffs. And they'll tell you that. Hockey, these guys, it's just a beating for these guys. They go on. But it's what happens in the middle if they have a run of bad luck that could kick them out and change the success of their season. The chase and the art of the deal is part of the fun. One of the companies I worked with, I used to laugh at because they would incent the branches for new volume. And they'd give Rolex watches. We're going to give, for every branch that originates 500 loans this month, we're going to give a Rolex. And these branches were getting Rolexes right and left. And us, the poor idiots back into servicing going, who in the world's buying this stuff? No one's loving us. They're loving the guys on the front. The art of the deal was fun for them, but there wasn't anything holding them accountable. It's everything that happens after the deal that's more or less going to dictate whether you make money. It's that middle of the season piece. What would you rather have? 2 pieces of bread, or you want something in between? Finance companies are no different. From sales and marketing department, everyone dedicates a lot of money, sales, marketing. We got to get new business in the door. We got to focus on this. We got to focus on originations. We're going to build all these new scorecards. We're going to do all these things to make the dealers, to try and get the dealers to do business with us and get these deals funding. All right, we're done. Then it comes, we've got to live with these accounts for 3, 4, 5, 6 years. When we hear how good finance companies are, we always hear about how great their origination strategies are. When we hear how bad finance companies are, we hear that their servicing or their collections is terrible. Does that sound familiar? Bottom line, you can't make a bad deal good, but you can make a good deal bad. And that's one of the things. If you got a bad origination strategy, I don't care how good your servicing arm, your collections group, or whatever it is, it's not going to help. When I talk about stuff in the middle, we talk about invoicing, payment processing, account maintenance, customer care, collections, Toddle Management, bankruptcy, total loss, impound, repo, remarketing, lease terminations. How many in this room are vendors that provide at least one of these services? Okay? We've gone to specialization, and this is interesting. Servicing is the cost of doing business. The greatest thing in the world is if we could originate a loan, never have to talk to that customer again, an account go to term and pays off, okay? That's where you make money. Whenever a human being or technology has to get involved in between that process, that's when it starts costing money, okay? If a lender never had to speak to the customer, that's perfect. The reality is poor customer experience equates to increased servicing costs. If we can't address the customer's needs, then they're going to keep calling in. That costs money. It also costs loan productivity because they're not going to come back. The easiest customer to get is the one that's had a good experience with you because they're going to come back, or you're going to get referrals. And then the customer experience impacts overall loan performance. You're sitting here, you got customer, they owe you, the guy next door, and they've got a bad customer experience with you. Who are they going to pay? The guy next door. So it's all about how we treat the consumer on the servicing sides. What does good customer service look like? More and more, and this is something that we have to think about and think about where we're investing. Self-service. Customers don't want to talk anymore. We talked about the generations. Your kids. How many of them communicate if they're sitting right next to each other with one of these? These are our consumers. They don't want to talk to each other. My customer contact rate on my outbound calls is 1.8%. 1.8%. When I look at text, they'll respond to text. They'll respond to email, but they don't want to talk because then there's emotion involved. The other thing that's very, very interesting, and we'll talk about this a little later on those stats, is the customer needs to know you're thinking about them even if they're not going to talk to you. The variety of communication methods. Again, we have to provide different ways for the customer to communicate with us, to be able to service their account if they got to go online. Our customers can go online, go to the payment provider, they can see their statement. I don't even have to house this. My payment provider is the one that provides the invoice for them to look at, the whole 9 yards. Flexible payment methods. They need to be able to pay every shape, form, and fashion. If you don't provide that, then you're going to miss out on something. Interestingly, we service about 25,000 accounts right now. We may receive 15, 20 payments in the mail a week, and probably the same cash using MoneyGram or Quick Collect or something like that. They're all electronic, ACH, scheduled debit, credit cards, or check by phone. The customer has to talk to a representative of a company. They need to talk to someone that's thoroughly trained. And this gets into the specialization of a lot of the entities that are out there. They got to talk to someone that has a positive attitude. No one wants to talk to the Debbie Downer. And it's interested in fulfilling the customer's needs. We have to focus on getting things done the first time, or it's not going to happen. The cost of good customer experience, human resources, that's the most expensive thing that any of you can have. I've gone from working for a finance company to now a servicing company. I had my servicing company, and the challenge here is if I didn't have to put butts in seats, my servicing costs would be X. But for every butt in a seat that I have to put, that's where my cost runs up. I've got to move the prices up. Technology. Technology's changing so fast. There's a lot of vendors in here that focus on, they provide one type of technology, and you guys have seen it change time after time, or over the years. Patience, you got to be patient. We have to be patient with the customers because you're dealing with different generations. They have different needs. Focus. Now companies more than ever have to stay focused because of the compliance issues that are out there. They've got to attack one thing at a time. You got to have drive, and then most of all, initiative. The thing that sort of surprises me, especially the reason I started the servicing company in 08 or 07, is I said, okay, all these people are going to learn their lesson. When they come back out of this recession, they're going to want to focus on originations instead of building an origination program and a servicing program. When they came out, what did they do? They tried to do both at the same time. And in today's environment, because of the specialization out there, it's so difficult to do. They need to focus on building the origination strategy, get that nailed down, figure out if you're going to be able to make money on it, and then move to servicing. But if you can't make money on your origination platform, then you have no business trying to build a servicing platform because you're buying bad loans and you can't make the bad loans good. Again, I was the opponent of outsourcing, but over the years, the thing that I've realized, and I was looking at the progression of this, it's starting to make sense because of the specialization. Certain functions going back to the 80s, for those of you that are as old as I am, the only things we had was a credit bureau, the old micro-built machines. John, you may remember that. The things would come up, you'd enter the credit application, and these things would come out, spit it out, and then if you stored it after about 6 months, then paper was white because it all went away. Lockbox, we had lockboxes. All payments went to a lockbox. No payments came in. And then auto auctions, that's the only way we could move cars is we'd send them to the auction. Then the 90s came around, and then companies started focusing on data, okay? We started getting LexisNexis. The credit bureau started adding a couple products. Your Accurate, Fast Data had their deal. So the data started to get aggregated to where we could actually go in and pull reports. We didn't have PCs yet. We had to go through and still pull them off hard machines. And then repossessions. I remember the rule came that if a customer threatened us, that we could use a repossessor. Up to that time, we were out knocking doors, stealing cars. We'd go out at night with a key ring full of keys, and we'd go out and take the cars. Then mandate came down, well, if you get threatened, then you can use a repossessor. So it was at that time we'd do everything we could to make the customer mad, so we'd threaten us so we can go get the car. As technology continued into the 90s, then you started seeing the payment vendors. Western Union was probably one of the first ones. They were into the quick collect service, the cash, and then MoneyGram and a couple others got into that. Toddle vendors all then started hitting the scene because the finance companies started to spread out in multiple locations, so companies started focusing on titles. In the 2000s, and this is getting where everyone could probably relate, people started focusing on collection systems, okay? You had, at that time, back in the 80s, 90s, you had Fiservs, you had the Shaws, you still have Fiservs and Shaws. At this time, then you started seeing a couple new vendors come out that were focusing on specific items, i.e. collections, instead of just a loan platform. Customer contact solutions started popping up, okay? You can email customers now because PCs, everyone was starting to have a PC. So then contact solutions began to change. We went from the old Melita dialers, we went through to upgraded dialers where you could do more than one thing. Bankruptcy software started kicking in. Back then, we'd just all have to do it manually. Companies started coming out with software to focus specifically on the bankruptcy process. Repo forwarders came into being. LPR technology came in. And then credit dispute software even came into place. So you can see over the last 10 years in this, companies started specializing on very specific products. In 2010, companies were created that focus on specific functions of the business. So we've gone from technology, now we're getting into functionality process. And in 2010s, you've got compliance companies out there. Any compliance companies in here? Nearshore, offshore call centers. A lot of people, when they hear outsourcing, they think, oh, my calls are going to be handled in India or Philippines, whatever. That's not the case anymore. There's onshore. Nearshore, offshore processing companies. I remember we were doing, when DealerTrack started, and we were doing getting all this app volume, we were trying to process them in-house, and we sent them down Mexico, I believe it was Global Lending? Is that the name of that company that was down there? Or Global Services? And they would enter all our applications. That's the first example I ever had of offshore or nearshore. And then repo and remarketing companies started popping up. It's interesting that it's all these very manual or high-risk things that started making sense. And then lease termination companies also started popping up. So today, in auto finance world today, one has to look at the business, okay? Whether if you're a startup or if it's a company that's been in business, says, all right, how am I going to move on? How am I going to keep progressing to embrace tomorrow's consumer? You've got to sit here and say, all right, what's going to cost me? Do I have the expertise to do it? Do I have the flexibility to do it? Do I have the focus to do it? The challenge to me on this, we all know that finance companies have unlimited budgets, can spend as much as they want, so that's never an issue. Expertise, that's why I sold my companies is I needed people that were a lot smarter than I did. I needed IT resources. I needed legal resources. I needed accountants and that type of thing. So I had to make a decision, and that's why I sold is I needed the expertise. Flexibility, we've got to be open-minded. And then most of all, focus. We have to focus on what do we want to be, okay? If we want to be all things to all people, we're probably not going to be very good at it. Where does a company want to focus its effort? Smart companies try and build the origination platform. I touched on this. The origination platform's more or less going to dictate whether or not a company makes money. That's all there is to it. Prove your model. If your model pans out, your scorecards are right, then start focusing on your servicing, but don't try and accomplish both at the same time. Tomorrow, our business is going to continue to evolve. When you look at the market today, we're starting to see the subscription-based ownership. We talk about rideshare. Rideshare is more of the zip car. I can go down and get this car and drive it for the week and come back. Subscription services are more of what the Mavens and these companies are doing, where you can do a short-term lease or you can do a long-term lease, a 24-month lease, but at any time during that lease, you can go swap cars out. It's the summertime, I want a convertible, I'm going to lease it, or I'm going to drive it for 3 months. And then school starts, and okay, I need a minivan to take the kids to school. I'm going to go get a minivan, but it still fits within that same lease. The lease term doesn't change, the payments don't change. Short-term, all-inclusive leases. There's a lot of companies that are going out right now, and they're doing short-term leases. They may be 12-month leases, they may be 6-month leases. It includes maintenance, and it includes insurance, so it's one price. Autonomous transportation, that's supposedly the thing of tomorrow. So the question is, what's your business going to look like? What are you going to do to embrace all these things? Now, I talked about each one of these processes, and we can talk through, and you guys jump in. The invoicing payment processing piece of the world, I don't know that we send out hardly any invoices anymore. Everything's done electronically, whether it's by text, whether it's via email. The cost of document management's getting so huge, it's easier to do it electronically and use Amazon Cloud or Microsoft Cloud or one of those to store all the documents. Electronic payments, if you can't provide all these payment solutions, you're missing the boat. Got to have the customer able to do their own thing. The account maintenance piece of it, and you guys, this is where you guys, a lot of y'all can jump in. Workflow's the key, okay? Workflow in a lot of these areas automates, keeps from having to have someone change a status code on an account or move it from A to B to C to D. When you get into workflow, automated workflow, it allows you to bring a person in, doesn't matter what the skill set is, and all that person does is punch this button every single day. A lot of the technology that's coming out there, I've seen some collection software systems now that have built workflow systems to where it's just drag and drop. If you want a letter where they've got to send a post-repo notice, they drag it into the workflow, and it automatically kicks it off, or it puts it in the workflow, then that happens from there on out. Automated AP, a lot of you vendors, have to bill your clients. There's got to be a better way to do that. We've got to be able to do it transactionally to where if you perform a function, it automatically creates that invoice to where you don't have to have a whole AP department managing that. And same thing with AP and AR, it's both of them. And then tolls and citations. Any toll citation vendors in here? Tolls and citations, whenever we got into servicing one of the big rideshare companies, you think about tolls and citations. If you're a lease customer, you're driving down the road, you drive through a toll booth, and you don't have your sticker, then you'll receive something in the mail. What's happening with these rideshares, Exchange, Uber, when we were servicing them, this guy would run through 10 times a day through the toll booth. So I went from getting 1 toll a day to getting 10 tolls on that customer a day. Then you got cities like Baltimore, Maryland, where half the city is no stopping zones. But a customer would come out of the building and say, all right, I need an Uber. They'd click Uber. The Uber would pull over, pick them up. There's cameras all over the place. Whenever they stop to pick them up, boom, citation generates. They send it to the lessor, and we get it. We have to pay these. My toll and citation went up just because of rideshare. We went up over 75%. So I had to build a whole organization to do nothing but manage that process. There's companies out there we found that do that exact thing. That's all they do. They're hooked into these companies. They're hooked into the toll authorities and into the cities to where they intercept the citations. They do them electronically, and then they say, all right, here's how much you owe us. A lot cleaner. Taxes. We got to pay taxes on leases. Now there's companies out there that they will actually manage the taxes which each municipality around the country. Anyone in here doing that? You guys not doing that? And then vehicle maintenance. Vehicle maintenance is a real big piece of it now, especially with these short-term leases. Vehicle maintenance is part of it, so I have to have a staff now that approves warrant or vehicle maintenance. 5,000 miles, I have to call the customer and say, hey, you haven't taken your vehicle in, you need to take it to Pet Boys or wherever it is we've got the agreements with and get this stuff done. So this piece is another piece that needs to be automated where a customer can online self-serve it and we can push it out instead of me having the bodies to do it. Customer care and collections. Again, self-service is one of the biggest things in customer care and collections that we have to address. We have to give the customer the ability to self-serve. They need to be able to make their own promises. And this is one of the things that's funny is people go, when you talk to a lot of the experienced people, the people that have been around for a while, they say, I can't have a customer make a promise online. Why not? They're going to lie to you online. They're going to lie to your face. What does it matter? You can put controls in around that. They got to be able to make wet payments. What you want them to do, be able to do is do everything online so you never have to hear from them at all. There's zero interaction. One of the other things I got down below is virtual VRU, okay? If you call American Airlines or some places, you call American Airlines and they say, hi, Scott, I see this is your number. They know who they're talking to. Then ask me what I want. I say, new reservation. Hold on 1 second. Where would you like to go? When would you like? So if you think of VRUs or IVRs, right now, press 1, press 2, press 3, press 4. They have to go through this whole thing. But on these automated, the virtual VRUs, the customer can talk to it. It saves a lot of time. Customers would rather do that because, again, they don't have to talk to the individual. It's a much more pleasant experience. They don't have to listen to 40 prompts to get there. The communication strategy, again, call, text, email, we've got to get there. Everyone, if you're not there, you're way behind because that's been around for a while. I can cut a third to half of my staff, my collection staff, just off that piece alone. We were able to cut a third of it out. Is there such thing as prime time anymore? For those that have been around for a while, used to have prime time. Everyone's got to be on a call at 8 a.m. in the morning till about 11, and then prime time started again at 4 o'clock and went to 8 o'clock at night. I get now with all these other options, I get stuff at 2 and 3 in the morning. There's no such thing as prime time anymore. Customers don't call you back. Customers pay if they know you're thinking about them. I touched on this. We ran a champion challenger on behavioral strategies. And we went through on behavioral strategies and said, okay, if I start calling a customer at 5 days past due versus 7 days past due versus 10 days, what's the impact? Okay? One of the other things that we did is we said, all right, we're going to call them every day and we're going to send a letter out. We looked at the contact rates on all these. Contact rates were terrible. But the thing we found is if we didn't call the customer every day and leave the message, they wouldn't pay. But if we called and left the message, they would pay because they knew we were thinking about them. So it doesn't matter if you're talking to the consumers anymore, as long as they know you're thinking about them, they're going to pay. So this is one of the big things that people get hung up on. I've got to talk to the customer. I've got to talk to the customer. They need to know you're thinking about them if you're not talking to them. Toddle management. Title vendors in here. Who does title? PDP? Walters Kluwer? All right. Title management's gotten big. It's gotten complex. Title management varies by portfolio type, okay? I do a lot of buy here, pay here servicing. On buy here, pay here portfolios, the default rates are 20, 25%, as high as 30% in these portfolios. I want those titles in-house, okay? But if it's a prime portfolio, I don't want the title. I want it to stay out there. I want someone else to manage it. It just takes up space in my organization, so I can use e-title or a custodian for that. E-titles, again, they don't take up real estate. Title services, use them. They know what they're doing. They can spin titles a lot quicker than we can. And then from an electronic workflow, again, we talked about that. Bankruptcy, there's companies out there that focus on bankruptcy software now. The question is, do we hold it or do we sell it? One of the things that everyone's so afraid of in bankruptcy is they think it's rocket science. It's really not. It's process. But if you've got software out there, we have any bankruptcy software in here? I know there's a couple around. That's all they do. Why are you trying to figure stuff out whenever people already specialize in it? Total loss impound, again, this is one of the things that can cost a company a lot of money. Insurance tracking, a lot of tracking services in here, okay, two tracking services in here. CPI, FPI, again, quality of the portfolio dictates whether or not you want to force place insurance. A lot of times it can increase losses. Rebates and cancellation, who handles rebates and cancellations, okay? Now I don't even have to call to cancel credit life disability service contract, chase that. There's companies out there that do those services. Negotiating settlements. If you got a vehicle that's not worth repossession, then do you want the car back? Negotiate the settlements. There's companies, there's software that you can use to do that. Notification services, there's bankruptcy notification, SCRA services, all sorts of notification services. Why do this stuff manually? Lien services, government impounds, there's process and services out there that manage that. And then come and bring up the backside. The lease termination process, again, there's organizations that focus on each one of these. So in the end, as we wrap this stuff up, we've got to sit here and look at, we've all done things. We all try and build the perfect organization, but there's so many different components in it. We have to sit here and say, what do I want to do? What do I want to be good at? If I want to be a good originator, then be a good originator. If you want to be a good collection shop, then be a good collection shop. But do you want to be a good collection shop, title shop, payment shop, invoicing shop, the whole 9 yards? If you don't, there's companies out there that specialize in that stuff, and a lot of times they can do it cheaper than you can. Okay, questions? I know a lot of you guys out here do this stuff, so. Thank you.